All right, here we go. Looks as though that we're live now. Greetings from Tel Aviv, Israel, everyone. It is about 8:40 p.m. here right now, and it's been a rather busy day here. We'll let a few people log on at this juncture, but another big day of news that we've had out here, and it's an honor to be with you all here today. I've been in and out of the Middle East since October 7th, 2023, and really excited to have this opportunity to interact with so many of you as a few more people begin to log on here, and we talk about all the happenings that are taking place in this region right now, not just Israel as a whole, foreign affairs as well. But I hope that any questions that you all might have for us today, that I can share a little bit of perspective on what's going on out here and try and connect a few dots, that any questions or any thoughts that you might have, happy to chime in on that as well. But it is the evening hours here in Israel right now. The sun has now set, and this ceasefire appears to be holding out here, which I think is the big thing that a lot of us were wondering what was going to happen here. The last time that I returned here to Israel, about 2.5 weeks ago now, right at the start of this war here, and there was just all this tension that was on the ground. I remember, crossing the border from Jordan into Israel, and immediately, as we had crossed back into Israel, sirens started going off. There was a drone in the air, actually, that the Iranians had launched that had just crossed into Israeli airspace, and we saw a couple of attack helicopters pursue it and ultimately shoot it down. But we had to run to the bunkers and to the bomb shelter shortly thereafter. And I remember sitting inside of that bomb shelter, and you were just seeing people who, had tears streaming down their faces and, had their hands clasped in prayer, very, very concerned if they would survive this moment or not. And ultimately, the alert passed, the drone was shot down, and people were able to leave the bomb shelters and then proceed on their way. That was about the most tense that I'd seen Israel, really in the last year and a half that I'd been here. And of course, direct aftermath of October 7th, a lot of tension, a lot of concern, a lot of uncertainty about what the world may look like and what the future may hold for people here. But I mean, just these last couple of weeks, there has been this cloud of uncertainty over people's heads, and especially this recognition of Iran's capabilities. I think that was a big part of the reason that you had this degree of concern on the ground here. And that is what we have really felt for the last couple of weeks. But fast forward to this moment right now, and things are a little bit different here. I mean, it just feels as though a lot of this tension has been released. We're not too far away from the beach here, and as I look over, you actually see a few people who are playing volleyball on the beaches right now. People out on the boardwalk walking around. Some of the restaurants are full this evening. It is Shabbat here in Israel, so that means that it's a celebratory night. It's the Sabbath that they're celebrating here, and people will come together, gather around the dinner tables, and as one family celebrate Shabbat this evening. And you have started to see, I mean, this is going to be the first Shabbat since the end of the war taking place. And can't even begin to tell you, how much excitement there's been on the ground here from people. But it's not just Israel as well, in which you have seen this release of tension. If you look at a lot of the images that are coming out of Tehran right now, people are starting to go out and about in that city as well. And that's what is giving a lot of us so much confidence that maybe the worst is behind everyone. And maybe all of this fighting here between Iran and Israel is completely in the past. And maybe both of these countries will be able to look towards the future here now. So, I mean, that is really the dynamic that, we're currently looking at here on the ground. And that's kind of, the situation that we're all living in right now. But there's a lot of questions. I guess the big one is, where do we all go from here, right? And we've started to hear a lot more people talking about that on the ground. Big thing is the focus shifting to the situation in Gaza. And you have felt this happen near instantaneously here. You even heard from the IDF this evening. The chief of staff for the IDF just came out a short while ago and said, because of the way that the situation with Iran ended, it seems as though that they believe that this is going to have an impact on their operations in Gaza. Whether that ends up proving to be true or not, that all remains to be seen. But that's what they're saying here this evening, right now, that maybe that this helps with the situation in Gaza, at least with their operations there. And Gaza has really quickly started to come back into center fold here on a multitude of different levels. On the one hand, the hostage situation, very quickly, you've seen hostage families coming out saying, now that the situation with Iran appears to be in the rearview mirror, let's bring the focus back on getting hostages home. From the international community, the humanitarian situation that's ongoing in Gaza, Qatar has been very outspoken, re-upping their concerns as late as today that they would like to see these talks beginning to progress to end the fighting that is in Gaza, which when the war ends there, when the fighting ends there, should allow for more aid to enter the Gaza Strip and for it to more pointedly get into the hands of the people who need it most. That's what you've heard from a lot of people in the international community. And then there's this big picture here. Now you're starting to hear people on the ground talk about more. There's actually a billboard that went up not too far away from where we are, and it has President Trump in the center of it. Standing next to him is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that has all of the leaders that are in the Middle East, the temporary leadership in Syria, the King of Jordan, the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, the King of Saudi Arabia is on this as well, and it's talks about this broader vision and goal that people have for the region as a whole. That there's normalization of relations with Israel. There's an expansion of the Abraham Accords. Diplomatic relations open up. You go back to the last Abraham Accords, that was rather transformative here in the region, with countries such as the UAE normalizing relations with Israel, Bahrain, Morocco, all of these countries, are starting to normalize relations that they have with Israel. But there's plenty of meat on the bone still for all of that. And the big one that people are talking about here is Saudi Arabia. How do you get the Saudis on board in order to open up diplomatic ties? Well, a big element to all of this right now is the situation in Gaza and the issue of Palestinian statehood. That is the issue that the Saudis would like to see sorted out first before they move in to normalizing relations. So it really does feel as though we are here in a very pivotal moment in time in the Middle East. So I'm glad that you all are able to join us, as we sit here at the precipice of what could potentially be a historic moment. And you've even heard that from the prime minister himself, recognizing that now that Iran appears to be in the rearview mirror, that there's opportunities elsewhere in the region. Here's how all of these kind of tie together. And this is all backed up by the State Department, Western intelligence agencies across the G7, et cetera. Iran is viewed as this epicenter of destabilization in the region, whether that is Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias operating out of Iraq or Syria, the Houthis that are in Yemen. All of these roads, according to all these intelligence agencies, go back to Tehran, whether that's training militias or troops, or whether that's supplying them with ordinances or weapons or missiles or anything of the kind. Iran is viewed as this epicenter of destabilization. Well, now that you see what has happened here in the region in recent days, in which the Israelis have carried on this so-called 12-day war with Iran, which, according to their estimates, as well as U.S. estimates and other, again, Western intelligence agencies, has really diminished ballistic missile capabilities, nuclear production, setting Iran back by years. I know that there's dispute about that with that Pentagon report that some people are talking about back in the United States. Pretty much everyone is in lockstep here on this side of the Atlantic, that they believe that Iran has truly been set back years here. So if Iran is truly weakened and its stature is diminished here in the region, that subsequently impacts their ability to fund, to destabilize, to provide all these different groups in the region with the tools that they need to either carry out attacks on Israel, attacks on U.S. service members in the region, or other groups, that are here in the Middle East that significantly diminishes their capability on that front. So that's why there's so much optimism here in this present moment right now. And I think that's going to be the big thing that we're all going to be watching here is if Iran's role in the region here is diminished, how does this trickle down? You know, you've already seen Hezbollah's capabilities have been diminished. The Houthis in Yemen definitely seem as though that they still have plenty of firepower here, and they have made very clear that they intend to resume their operations, carrying out attacks on ships in Gulf of Aden, Red Sea, et cetera, over the future here. Does Iran still have that ability to fund and to arm here in the Middle East? I think is going to be the big question that we all watch. If they don't, if Iran's capabilities are truly diminished to to the level that you've heard from both the U.S. and Israel, well, then there's the potential for stabilization here in the region. And there's a few of these countries that I think that people are looking towards the most here is the possibility where things could change. Saudi Arabia, as we already talked about. Syria seems to be one in which people are pointing to as a prime target for an expansion of Abraham Accords, an expansion of normalization with the fall of the Bashar al Assad regime earlier this year. Lebanon is another one that you have here, which is just to the north of us. Um, all these countries share borders, but you can't cross the borders. I mean, that's the level at which a lot of these disputes are operating at right now. There's no border crossing that leads you between Israel and Lebanon or Israel and Syria. The pipe dream one day is that all that could change? Does it actually? Does it not? I think that's kind of what's going to remain to be seen here. But bottom line is that it certainly seems like it's a very different environment that we're all living in right now here in the region. I mean, it seems as though that for the first time since October 7th, I've really seen optimism here that there could be brighter days on the horizon. It's interesting when you talk to people here is that like they feel as though that time has stood still since October 7th. That ever since there was that moment there, the calendar has not flipped over. October 8th has not arrived. And instead, people are just incessantly in this holding pattern, waiting for the sun to rise again. And I think that people on the ground here have an appetite for that to come to an end and to move forward. But all that really hinges on the situation that's in Gaza right now, which is why you were starting to see the focus shifting a little bit back towards the situation in Gaza, the situation with hostages, in which you still have all these hostages that are currently being held in Gaza, and progressing forward and winding down the war that is there. And I think that there's the potential that we're going to see some kind of movement on this in the coming weeks, coming months. That's purely speculative at this point. You just get the feeling on the ground here, the way that the landscape has been shifting a little bit, that maybe, just maybe, something is going to happen here in the coming days and coming weeks. So that's kind of the micro picture, and then the big picture of where things stand here in the region and what we're kind of waiting to see over the coming days and weeks. But the big thing is that, I mean, since October 7th, this all just feels so different right now. I just remember getting here on October 8th. I flew in from London, and there was all this uncertainty about what the world would bring. That's when people were talking about the beginning of the war. And there was just this cloud of dread that was hanging over people's heads. And it has subsided a bit over the last year and a half or so, but it has never really gone away. It's just felt as though that time has not been able to move forward. And now, for the first time, really, since October 7th, does seem to be an appetite on the ground here for people to move forward with their lives and try and reestablish some degree of normalcy that may be here. Joshua, I see your comment here. I was there around this time in 2022. Any chance it could get back to those points? I think it's possible. I think it's certainly possible. But by that same token, no. I mean, think back to 9/11, 2001. Have we really returned to a pre 9/11 state? Well, in some aspects, people aren't afraid to go out anymore like they were on, say, September 12th, 2001. People aren't afraid to fly anymore like they may have been on September 12th, 2001. But in many cases, society hasn't changed. All you have to do is go to an airport to see that we're not back to where pre 9/11 was. And I think that that's going to be a similar sentiment that you have here in Israel. I think policy wise in Israel as well, that's something that people talk about. And you've heard this from the top Israeli leadership over the last couple of weeks. There was a time, before October 7th, in which the Shin Bet and intelligence agencies across Israel believed that they had the ability to, I don't want to say manipulate, but they had the ability to mold actions of actors around the region, particularly Hamas, that they had the ability to deter Hamas from engaging in any actions, or convince them, that they shouldn't carry out attacks on Israel or anything of the kind, and maintain this holding pattern through the capabilities of the intelligence agencies that they have. That doctrine is now gone. That is over. And a sentence that you've heard from a lot of Israelis in recent weeks is that when people tell you that they want to kill you, you should believe them. That is what we have seen with these actions taken with Iran in recent weeks. They have heard the regime in Iran say death to Israel, death to the United States. And they have seen Iran taking steps with these nuclear programs in order to enrich uranium to a point beyond civilian use. So they have heard people in Iran say that they want the Israelis dead, and they have seen Iran taking action in order to carry out such an objective. The Israeli position is that, okay, when someone tells you what they're going to do and they start taking actions in order to achieve it, you need to take action as well. You cannot simply wait for this day to arrive. So there has been a watershed moment already when it comes to the way that policy, and for that matter, military action is going to be conducted here in Israel going forward. I think that that's going to be a big thing to watch here. Is that let's pick other actors around the region, whether that's militia groups in Syria, militia groups in Iraq. If they say that they intend to take more action against Israel, well, you're probably going to see Israel be a bit more proactive in taking preemptive measures against them. Potentially more strikes against these militias in Iraq, Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon. You might see a doubling down of efforts on that front here, similar to the effect that we've seen from Iran, with these strikes that were carried out by Iran, which ultimately broke out to the so-called 12-day war, according to President Trump, taking hold here. This is the pattern in which you've seen this play out. So to answer your question, could we get back to, a pre-October 7th state? There are certain elements of Israeli society in which you are starting to see that. People are going out to restaurants again. People are going out to bars again. People are going to the beach again. And that is ingrained centrally in Israeli culture to push past any of those moments here and try and carry on life as it was. But in many cases, life is never going to be the same again. The trust, that some Israelis were building with Palestinians, in many cases, you've heard it from people, is really broken. I mean, there were visa programs that existed before October 7th, which would allow Gazans to work in southern Israel, in some of the kibbutzim. I'm not sure if that's ever going to return again. I'm not even sure if people are really talking about that and policy of what that could look like. But I don't really hear an appetite from people on the ground here to resume that level of cooperation and collaboration with people in Gaza. Um, I think that you're going to see, changes in, exactly like the access, between Gaza and Israel. I mean, it's probably going to become even more and more difficult in order to go back and forth between the enclave and Israel itself. Um, it certainly seems as though there's going to be changes and there's going to be things that are going to be different. Um, Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if things can ever possibly be kind of the same as they were before October 7th, 2023. I was very blessed that I was able to spend a little bit of time in Israel before October 7th. And even at that time, you would walk around a city such as Tel Aviv. And Tel Aviv is, it's its own. unique entity here. I mean, Tel Aviv is a more progressive, young city that is here in Israel. It's different than the rest of the country, that's for sure. And you would walk around here and people would talk about the situation with the Palestinians, be that the West Bank or be that Gaza. And they would use phrases like it's complicated. They don't know what the solution is. And the bottom line is that it's still complicated and people still don't really know exactly what any kind of a solution could possibly be here in the region. But people have not lost hope, I would say. People have not lost the ability to think into the future and aspire for better, more peaceful days. That is the thing that I would say, sometimes gets lost in the broader conversation is that just everyone here in this country dreams of days in which there could be peace throughout the Middle East and that there could be stability and that there could be normalization. In fact, this conversation that we had with one local official in northern Israel, in Kiryat Shmona, which is a town of, call it 20,000 people right along the Israeli-Lebanese border. And this was right at the apex of Hezbollah's strikes for this was right at the apex of Hezbollah's strikes that were being carried out on northern Israel. I mean, at the time, people couldn't even move back into northern Israel. It was such a dangerous environment as Hezbollah was constantly launching rockets and missiles at these northern Israeli towns every day. And this one local official said, my dream is to build a train station. And I thought that was so peculiar. It's like, what is he talking about, building a train station? And he was talking about how his dream was to build a train station in northern Israel where the lines would run to Beirut and they would run to Damascus. And you could, in theory, hop on that train every day and take the 45-minute train or however long it is. Because, I mean, all these cities, they're not far from where we are right now, whether it's 45 minutes or an hour, to Beirut, to Damascus, to go get lunch, as he said, to have hummus, up there and then come home. That is the dream that people here have because you can't do that. You can't really do that in this region. Jordan has diplomatic ties with Israel. At times, they're pretty frosty. Egypt has diplomatic ties with Israel. Those are especially frosty, particularly ever since October 7th opened up here. And there have been multiple instances in which Egypt has threatened to annul their peace treaty with the Israelis over the situation that's currently ongoing in Gaza.
Hey
So
Robert.
that's a big thing.
Hey Robert,
Hey
this is
there.
your producer Megan. I've got a question from one of
Sure.
our viewers. This is from at EJ Watcher. They posted to us and they're asking, I guess the question is, how much safer do you all feel?
Oh yeah. I mean, night and day safer. And I think that that's an interesting question because I mean, you go back to like the imminent aftermath of October 7th, and people were scared, people were nervous, but people didn't feel overly threatened up here in Tel Aviv by Hamas's rockets. You go down to southern Israel, it'd be a different story, and it gets a little bit more dicey there. But this situation with Iran, people took very seriously. You were talking about high-level ballistic missiles that were being fired from Iran into Israel here. And that, now that this has all subsided here, people are feeling a lot more comfortable and a lot better. My producer Will is telling me that we have to do a live shot here in the next couple minutes, so that's what we're going to have to get set up for here. So yeah, he's going to move the camera now. So you'll get a look at kind of how this whole operation works here now.
Yeah, talk us through, Robert, Will, how you guys are doing this with the phone.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing, like what you have with modern technology. So, we're actually using cell phones in order to do our live reports here. It's amazing how much the cameras on these phones have advanced in the last couple of years. And I mean, the shot quality looks practically identical to a camera that's tens of thousands of dollars. But in order to get the live shot out, you use the cell service that is here. Back home, Verizon, AT&T, it's the exact same concept, and you use that in order to get a live shot out. And It's strong enough here, and mix that with the Wi-Fi, that it works practically the same as, if we were to do a live report in the United States with a traditional television camera or anything of the kind. But we use our balcony here in order to get the backdrop of the Tel Aviv skyline. And we use these phones here in order to do our live reports. And Will has this lens attachment that he uses on the iPhone here, which makes the shot quality even more crisp. So it really is amazing. And I think that underscores the kind of time that we live in right now, in which, I mean, anyone can be a content creator. Anyone can go out there and do journalism and report and create content that can have an impact, because this is all that you need right now is a couple of cell phones, a couple of microphones, AirPods, to listen to your device or whatnot. I mean, all of that makes that's really truly all that you need here in order to pull this off. So it says as though that I'm looking at what our schedule is here for the evening. So it looks as though that we're at 2:14 Eastern time. Well, yeah, 2:14 Eastern time. So that's coming up in, call it 8-9 minutes or so. But we've been on every hour throughout the day. So we started off at 6 o'clock in the morning Eastern time, and we'll keep going. I think our latest live report that we have booked is at 6:30 Eastern time, so 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Possibility that we'll be in some of the later primetime shows. We'll leave that option on the table here for some long days, but with the time change, 6 o'clock in the morning is actually 1 o'clock in the afternoon here. So it's just a completely different schedule that we're all operating on. And then, of course, it's a double-edged sword, right? And that, when you get into the later evening hours, 6:30, which is a reasonable time that you all are having dinner back home in the United States, is the early morning hours here. So that's kind of the dynamic that we have to that we kind of have to work with here. Um,
Hey, Robert, would you like to take another question while you're waiting for your live shot?
yeah, we got a little bit of time.
Okay, great. Here's one from Myers Industries. For the amount of bombs dropped, I would have expected more catastrophic satellite images like craters and holes in the ground everywhere. Everything I've seen looks like a few burnt sheds and minor debris lying around. Aren't there weapons deep underground?
Yeah. I mean, I think from just to clarify the question there in terms of the destruction in Iran or the destruction in Israel. Either way, I kind of answer it either
This
way.
this is Iran on their nuclear sites. Our attack on
Iran,
Iran. Mhm,
Iran on their nuclear sites. I
mhm.
mean, I think it's just that it's like if you watch the videos, of those strikes there. I mean, you saw those huge plumes, that indicated, just the level of munitions that were being held underground here. I mean, these were a couple 100 feet underground from everything that we've seen. I think that you ask a good question there. Is that I mean, and I think that really emphasizes, just like how deep, some of these facilities were. I thought it was interesting when you listen to the Pentagon briefing here earlier this week. I mean, they were really all over this for 10, 15 years, in which this facility first started to be constructed. And you had people within the Pentagon who their whole focus was, following, the process of digging and moving out all of the dirt they were using in order to build this facility, and then watching as the ventilation shafts were constructed and every single detail as it came together. So I mean, they've seen this whole process evolving throughout the entirety here. So I mean, they knew exactly where the weak spots were. They knew exactly where they wanted to strike. And I mean, I think that this really shows, I mean, just how deeply embedded in a mountain this infrastructure was in order for them to strike this like this. And I think it's pretty unbelievable, that they were that I mean, this is kind of what a lot of these images actually look like here. But a good question. I mean, it's and when you listen to the Pentagon here, they say that this went all according to plan. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion in the United States about was this a success, or not? Did they diminish Iran's capabilities by months or years? I think some perspective to add to that is what you hear from the Israelis right now, the Israeli intelligence agencies, which are totally united that all of Iran's capabilities were set back by years on end. Now, when you hear that, you might say, oh, Israel is, just standing by the United States. They don't want to counter Trump because they want to be on President Trump's side through all of this. And I understand that argument. But I think something you have to understand is that Israel has viewed Iran's nuclear production as an inherent threat to their existence, something that they believe is capable and would be used, would it not be for their intervention, to blow them off the face of the earth. So, because of that deeply held fear, if there were any concern that the strikes carried out by the United States did not do their job, or at least did not set Iran's nuclear program back by years, this is the hill that the Israelis would be dying on, would be my position here. You would be hearing them kicking and screaming about this issue as loud as they possibly could, because this is viewed as such an existential threat. Obviously, we're not, there, on the ground in Iran right now. But Israel has intelligence agents, that are on the ground in Iran, as they have so publicly said. They're getting their intelligence from a very micro, boots on the ground kind of level here. And as I said, if they had any concerns, we would really be hearing about it at this point. I think we're about 3 minutes away from our live report right now, so I'm going to take this microphone out and handle this, and then I'll come back to the live stream. Okay, so we're at 14 after here.
Yes, sir. Stand tall, look straight.
Yep, got you guys loud and clear. Yes, I got you loud and clear. Hitting in 10 minutes, top of the C block now. Okay, thank you for the heads up. Yes, mic check 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Great, thank you. So it looks as though we have a couple minutes here. So I see a couple of comments that are here. I guess I need to put the AirPods back in. We want to chat about that.
Robert, we can still hear you.
Okay, you can still hear all right? All right,
Yep.
Great. All right, so I see a couple of questions here. So first one, does Israel people feel that the state did a half job in Iran or a complete one? Good question. I think people on the ground here feel very confident that this has been a complete job here. Israel very publicly has said that they believe they have greatly diminished Iran's nuclear production ability, their ability to enrich uranium, setting that behind by years. That's the one that I think that people have heard the most about to this point. The other one is the ballistic missile capability, which sometimes gets overlooked. But that has been the real threat that we have seen firsthand here over the last couple of weeks. And, I think that, so let's just unpack the difference between Hamas rockets and Iranian missiles, right? So Hamas rockets, some of them, are professionally manufactured. Some of them are made from pipes, in the ground. And they, don't have, honing capabilities. You can't drop a rocket, onto a specific location. It's kind of just fired into the air and then it comes down where it comes down. So that's why the Iron Dome has been heavily effective at combating Hamas's rockets that have been fired from Gaza. the ballistic missiles that we've seen in recent weeks coming from Iran, the Iron Dome certainly knocked down the far majority of them, but we also saw more missiles getting past the Iron Dome than we've ever seen before. There were some days in which the estimates were about a 65% efficacy rate, hands down the lowest that we've seen. There's actually, just a couple blocks away from us, there's a building that was a direct hit by one of these Iranian missiles. So I bring that up because that is a real capability that Iran has, and Israel believes that they've greatly diminished that threat. That's why the Israelis are feeling a lot better right now. They believe that big picture here, much of this Iranian threat, this existential threat that they believe, threatens all day-to-day social order here, has been eliminated. And that's why there's this optimism on the ground that if that threat has been knocked out, that maybe the focus can shift entirely to the situation in Gaza. Maybe that means Hamas won't be able to rearm themselves in the way that they've been able to in the past. Maybe they won't have the backing from Iran. And maybe there's the possibility that a full court press is on in order to get a ceasefire deal done. We know a lot of the international community is going to be, and you are going to hear much more from the international community in the next couple of days, due to the humanitarian situation in Gaza. There's an article that came out in the Haaretz today, which is a local paper here in Israel, which detailed instances in which IDF troops have fired upon and killed hungry Gazans who are trying to get into the humanitarian lines here. The Israeli government has come out and firmly denied all of this very heavily here. Where the truth lies, that all remains to be seen when the investigations come out. But the Haaretz is a very well-respected newspaper that is here in Israel. And with those accounts that are coming from some IDF troops, it is certainly going to amplify the calls from the international community. You're already hearing from folks such as the Qatari leadership who want this to become a more central focus and want the conversations about Gaza to pick back up in the coming days and weeks here. So I think you're going to be seeing a lot more of that. You're going to be hearing a lot more about Gaza. It is pretty amazing how the focus has shifted so instantaneously here, away from Iran back to Gaza, away from the threat from Tehran to the hostage situation in Gaza, to the threats from Hamas and things of that nature as well. So I mean, it is pretty amazing how all of that has shifted rather quickly here. What about the people in Gaza? Absolutely. I mean, that is going to be something that we're all going to be talking about in the coming days. And you still see those images that are coming out of Gaza of hungry people wanting food. It's going to be interesting, to see, the new organization that is running point inside the Gaza Strip, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It has drawn criticism and scrutiny for being Israeli and American backed. They claim that they are running in conjunction with the UN and that their pure objective is to deliver meals directly to the people of Gaza. Next week, our intention is to speak with the leadership of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to take a deeper dive on exactly what their efforts look like to bring meals to the people of Gaza. How does this operation work? The effectiveness, how does it compare to groups such as the United Nations? So that's some reporting that we hope to bring to you next week here, focusing entirely on the humanitarian situation inside of Gaza. And I think that that's going to be very important. Okay, we have 3.5 minutes in break until our next report here.
Hey, Robert, while you're waiting to do your hit, something to think about. I've been seeing a lot of questions come in asking just this. They're saying, did Israel pull us into this war? So maybe something to answer when you come back from your live report.
Okay, great. Yes, absolutely.
Robert, do you want to tell the people the show you're about to be on a little bit about NewsNation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in just a couple minutes here, we'll be on NewsNation Now with Nicole Burley. This is going to be our second report for them today. It's been a very busy news day, as you can imagine, with the president taking the White House podium, and as he typically does, covering a lot of ground, right? Talking about a whole variety of different topics. The headline issue there, was talking about the one big beautiful bill, and talking about the Supreme Court cases today where you saw some rulings. But in that same breath, he also talked about the situation out here. And I thought it was interesting that there's been a lot of back and forth, between Tehran and Washington about, are they going to pick up direct talks with one another or not? And Tehran has very publicly said that, they're not going to confirm there's going to be any conversations. And they have, really tried to dig their heels in the sand and say that they don't want to necessarily open up direct dialogues with the United States. They're distrusting of the United States. But the president claims that Iran wants to meet and wants to talk. Who's telling the truth here? Where is the accuracy? It's somewhere in the middle there. But that is certainly going to be something to follow here. But I do think it's interesting. You talk about conversations between Iran and the U.S. What is the ultimate objective now? A nuclear deal? Well, you see Iran's nuclear capabilities have already been decimated. So exactly what kind of bite would a nuclear deal have? What effectiveness would it have? And you even heard the president, kind of talking about in the last couple of days that maybe a nuclear deal isn't the goal. Maybe it's to broker a relationship with Tehran and bolster relations there. Because, obviously, since 1979, 1 minute away, obviously, since 1979, relations with Tehran and Washington have been frosty at best, to say the very least here. So maybe there's a possibility that relations are bolstered in the wake of these strikes, which would be a bit ironic, but who knows? We can, especially on issues such as foreign policy, we only see what takes place in the public sphere. The conversations behind closed doors, in the back channels, through the mediators, that's where the real conversations happen, and those are conversations that we're not really privy to. All right, 30 seconds out. 15.
Stand tall, check.
A renewed focus on the war in Gaza. This present moment here is being framed as a potential watershed one here, with the IDF coming out a short while ago saying that they believe that due to the outcome of the 12-day war with Iran and the strikes that were carried out there, that it may ultimately help with their operations that are ongoing in Gaza. With the prime minister even saying that perhaps it even goes beyond Gaza, and all of this can be translated into change for the entire region. This is what the prime minister had to say on that. And in terms of the peace agreement that you talk about with Israel, also the United States wants to keep these conversations going with Iran. The president saying today from the White House podium that Iran wants to talk, although up to this point, neither Washington nor Tehran say that there's a formal meeting that is on anyone's calendar here or any direct conversations that are supposed to happen publicly, though the White House contends that the back channels still remain open here. And then there's this as well, is that The White House contends that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli leadership has shown an interest in making a journey out to Washington to visit the White House here. Nothing is formally on the calendar yet, but you've seen the way that Washington and the United States have been so tightly intertwined over the last couple of weeks. The Prime Minister's office describing the conversations and the level of communication as more than daily between those two leaders. Nicole? Yeah, I mean, Gaza has certainly come into center focus here in recent days, Nicole. In fact, it's been a rather instantaneous switch from the situation in Iran to the situation in Gaza, particularly when it comes to the issue of hostages that are being held inside of the enclave. Just today, the Hostages and Missing Families Forum set up a display outside of the U.S. Embassy branch office that's in Tel Aviv, and you can see it on your screen right there. It says, "They are dying." A reminder that there are hostages in Gaza, but further that many of these hostage families believe that time is running out. That's why you're starting to see the pressure building on the ground here again for some kind of movement to happen in Gaza, whether it's winding down the war, cutting a deal, anything to get those hostages out, because it is believed by many people on the ground here that before you can have these broader conversations about peace throughout the region, the situation in Gaza needs to be sorted first. Nicole? All right, that's it. So that's the magic of television right there. On for a couple of minutes here with Nicole Burley's team talking about a lot of the things that we've been discussing here. You know, the present mood that you have in Israel, where a lot of these conversations stand in the current geopolitical landscape in the Middle East in the wake of the 12-day war with Iran, and where the whole region is going to go from here. Let's see what else we have here.
Hey, Robert, I can tee you up to a question if you want to put your AirPods back in for us now that your live hit is over, too. That'd be great. We have a YouTube commenter asking, and they're referring to Iran here. Can someone explain what exactly they can do? If you can't protect your airspace, home, and military bases, what?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's been, I think it was a real big surprise to a lot of people here, the way that Israel was able to to really establish aerial dominance almost from the get-go here. And I think it begs a bigger question, you know, the firepower of all these different nations in the region. Exactly what are their capabilities here? And I think that you ask a really good question, you know, because I mean there has been this cloud of broader fear here in Israel over the last, you know, I mean not just since October 7th, but I mean for decades on end. Like, what would a toe-to-toe fight with Iran and Israel look like? You know, how bloody, how gruesome would this be? There are casualties here in Israel, of course. I mean, several dozen people were killed. But I think that there is an expectation or an anticipation that this would be even more than what you've seen here. So, you know, I mean, in terms of, you know, the threat that Iran poses here, I'd say that people in Israel are starting to feel a little bit better about all of this here. But I mean, to your point, you know, I mean, if you can't defend your own air bases, if you can't maintain your own airspace, I mean, to the point that you're seeing these videos of Israeli jets refueling in Iranian airspace, I mean, that is unheard of. I mean, that is pure dominance that you are looking at here when it comes to aerial superiority. It certainly sends a message around the region, right? You know, that if Iran struggled to hold their own against Israel very explicitly. I mean, what does that say about anyone else, you know, that is around the region? What does that say, you know, about any of these militias that are operated here? Does Hezbollah think twice about rebuilding and, you know, trying to carry out attacks against Israel again? I don't know. But I mean, it's certainly was a surprise, I think, to a lot of people that this ended up being a 12-day war. And I think that what was an even bigger surprise, one person made this observation as well. You know, when you think about war, you think about boots on the ground, think about tanks, you think about artillery, you think about armored vehicles, you know, pushing through defensive lines. This is a war that was fought entirely in the sky. Missiles, rockets, drones, jets, entirely in the sky. You didn't have an invading force on the ground, aside from intelligence agents that are operating on the ground in either respective country. You didn't see commandos with boots on the ground, going street to street in Tehran or Tel Aviv. This was entirely a war that was fought in the skies here. And, I'm just not sure, I'm not even sure if there's, a war that we can think of in a recent time that was fought in such a manner here. So that was very interesting.
All right, Robert, I've got a question here from viewer
Mhm.
Wilbert. He says, the question is, what will Iranian people do? Are they just going to sit and watch other countries fix their problems?
Yeah, that's a really good question that I think that we're all waiting to see what these coming weeks look like. Um, the table looks different depending on where you sit here in the region, right? So, from a lot of Western perspectives, the moment seems ripe for the Iranian people to rise up and bring the regime down. It certainly seems like there's an opportunity there in moments in which Iran looked weak. I mean, this 12-day war certainly did not go their way, despite what the supreme leader will try and say. Um, you heard the president's comments talking about how Iran told them that they intended to carry out an attack on that U.S. air base in Qatar. That certainly diminished a lot of the credibility of the supreme leader. No matter what they say, whether they deny it or not, I mean, now that it's out there in the public sphere, certainly does damage the credibility of the regime. So, from our perspective here, this looks like the moment in time in which it would make sense for everyday people on the ground who have been dissenting against the regime to rise up, bring the regime down. But on the other hand, there's also this other psychological element as well. War has a unique uniting factor. And it's quite conceivable that, people who did not like the regime really did not like the sights of missiles and airstrikes pounding their cities and their infrastructure for 12 straight nights, even more. So that is going to be the distinction in order to navigate there, whether there is a strong enough dissenting voice in order for people to rise up and bring the regime down. What I do not think is going to happen, it does not seem as though that you are going to see a repeat of the Iraq War in which an external entity brings the regime down. It seems as though that there's a unified sentiment among the international community that if the regime in Iran is to fall, it is going to have to be brought down internally by the people and replaced with a new government by the people. And I think that that latter question is the big one here. What replaces the regime? It does not seem as though that there is a replacement government that is so obvious in the public sphere that could slide into that role and occupy it, that the international community could get behind, that would lead to a stable environment in Iran. Because the big fear is, what happens if the regime falls, there's no realistic government to take over, and a power vacuum is created. Yeah, I mean, we've seen this movie before in the Middle East again and again, and it creates a very dangerous environment. So I think we're all going to know in the coming days and weeks. Certainly, if there's a moment in which the regime is going to fall, this looks like the most opportune time that we've seen in recent months and years. I'm not sure if there's a strong enough alternative that exists that people can rally around in Iran present day that can replace the regime today. But who knows? I mean, that's a question I think that's going to be asked in the coming days and weeks. Here's an interesting one here. Any info on the THAAD tests? And is there any official saying how they performed? It's very clear, that while the Iron Dome and many of these defense systems, that Israel had here were able to be pretty effective, this was the least effective that we've seen any of the aerial defense systems, even beyond the Iron Dome, in any of these conflicts in recent memory. Again, I think that I was saying earlier that there was one day in which it was estimated you were looking at a 65% efficacy rate. That is far and away the lowest that we've seen from a lot of these air defense systems in recent time, which again shows it's a big difference when you're dealing with ballistic missiles coming from a sovereign state such as Iran, as opposed to rockets being fired by a militia in Iraq or Syria, or rockets coming from Gaza. Those capabilities make a huge difference and really put aerial defense capabilities to the test. So again, it seems that they were pretty effective, but not 100% effective. And I think that there's an argument to be made here in Israel is that Israelis have been the beneficiary of highly effective aerial defense systems for many years, to the point that sometimes they don't always take the aerial threat very seriously. Because I mean, if you have that level of defense capability, you'll see it sometimes. The sirens will start blaring, and people are on the beach. And while a lot of people run for cover, not everyone does. Some people will keep walking down the boardwalk or things of that nature. Seeing the weaknesses of the aerial defense systems here, not entirely, again, performed, it was certainly knocked down well over 50% of those missiles, but seeing some of those weak spots here, I think you've already seen it on the ground here, has changed the perspective of a lot of Israelis here, and they start to take a lot of these threats a little bit more seriously. But this is going to be a broader conversation as well, with the THAAD defense systems and their capabilities here. And as we have a broader conversations about aerial defense and other conflicts such as Ukraine as well, the total efficacy there, when you're going up against these really high caliber weapons that enemies are putting into the field. Good question here as well. What do the Israeli people feel about the fighting, and do they want peace or total domination in the Middle East? Just like the United States, and just like any political society out there, the population does not think or vote or act as a single block. It would be wrong to say that every one of the 350 million or so Americans in the United States thinks the exact same way. The same can be said for Israel, which is a country of 10 million people. There are people in the government, very publicly in Israel, who are advocates of establishing more settlements in the West Bank, or establishing settlements in Gaza, or expanding territory here in the region. Those perspectives do exist in Israel. It is not the majority, that is for sure. The average Israeli who I speak with has a broader pipe dream of peace in the Middle East. And maybe you were on, when I was telling this story earlier, but I'm going to go back to the story of the local official in northern Israel, who his dream is to build a train station that can take people from Tel Aviv all the way to Damascus, or all the way to Beirut, and you can go to the beach and you can have lunch and then you can come home. That is what people in Israel, by and large, truly want here. And there is optimism right now, more optimism than I've seen in a long time, that that is a possibility here. But to your point, there are also people within the government, within the voting masses, who would like to see territorial expansion, who would like to see the widening of settlements. This is a political ecosystem with people who have different temperaments, talents, and convictions the same way that we do in the United States, different viewpoints on the world here. And that is how a democracy works. There's a collision of different beliefs, different objectives, different end games that people are aspiring for. So that's how I would answer that question. I hope that answered it accurately here. Have you stepped foot into Gaza? I think is a really important question here. So we were in Gaza at the last time that we were there would have been, I think, January of last year. And it's a very tricky subject here because access into the enclave is entirely dependent on the IDF. You have to go in accompanied by the IDF in order to have access into Gaza. And right now, that access is entirely limited to reporters. Pretty much everything that you're seeing coming out of Gaza is coming from, people who have contracts with any of the wire services who were in Gaza before the start of the war. No Western media is getting into Gaza now, and even when they were getting in before, they had to be accompanied by the military. And it is a broader conversation about journalistic access that NewsNation has been outspoken about. We have publicly sent letters to the Israeli government demanding access to Gaza for journalists in order for people to see the situation that is ongoing there, as opposed to being entirely reliant upon these wire services that are there. It is an active war zone. It is a contained war zone, which is the public's stance as to why the IDF is not letting anyone in there right now. You can read between the lines on all of that, as much as you so choose at home. We continue to request access to Gaza on a consistent basis, and we are hoping that that access will be opened up sometime in the near future here. But that's the issue with dealing with an enclave, is that the entrance points are totally run by the Israelis right now, and access is entirely incumbent upon going in with the IDF. And right now, there are severe restrictions on any of that at this juncture. So hopefully, there are going to be opportunities in order to change that soon in the future. But this is, a debate and an argument that has been had between Israeli forces and international journalists across the globe pretty much since early 2024, I would say. I mean, for over a year now, this has been a big conversation here. So hopefully all that changes soon, because I mean, I'm still one of those believers in, the best cure is sunlight, and let people see the rawness of what is happening inside of Gaza, inside of all these communities here, and let people truly have the opportunity to make up their own minds.
Hey, Robert, that's all the time that we have for today. If you want to wrap up and thank
Great.
everybody for watching.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone, who has, been tuning into all this, and thank you for all your interest. And of course, you're welcome to write to me at my NewsNation email or on Twitter. I also have a newsletter that I'm trying to contribute to every couple of days, that you are welcome to subscribe to as well. But any questions that I didn't get to, would love to answer them. But thank you so much for your interest. Thank you for tuning in. And I always hope I was able to give a little bit of perspective on what's happening here in this region, what's happened over the last few days, and where we all go from here.